There's an interesting thing you say at the end, which I wanted you to elaborate on, where you say this isn't just a story about a third world country that's been exploited. This is a story that involves the global financial system with massive players, with very few checks and balances in place. For this to happen, the global financial system is also culpable. And for me, that was probably the most staggering notion, because we've been through the subprime crisis and nothing happened. Do you think the 1MDB scandal will change any of that?
Well, I think really interesting thing to watch now is what's going to happen in the US with its probes, the DOJ's probes into Goldman Sachs. I mean, Goldman Sachs was an enabler of this situation, and Goldman Sachs is the most powerful bank on Wall Street. For sure, Goldman Sachs missed red flags, right? When 1MDB asked for $3 billion of Malaysian money to be put into a small Swiss bank account, that's not normal, okay? You have plenty of decent banks here that can bank for a sovereign wealth fund like 1MDB. And regulators in the US will be looking at that and deciding how much they need to fine Goldman Sachs for missing red flags. And they will do that under the Bank Secrecy Act, which is an act that JP Morgan were fined under for missing the whole Bernie Madoff scandal. But beyond that, it's going to be really interesting to watch whether there is any criminal activity in the US against Tim Leissner, the Goldman banker who was involved in this, against Goldman itself.
So it's not just a fine?
That would be exactly. The fine would be a civil action. Fine, it could even be a deferred prosecution agreement where Goldman doesn't even have to admit wrongdoing. But there could also be criminal action here. We don't know yet. That's still playing out. And to get to what you were saying, there's a chapter in the book called White Collar Crime, and I think it's extremely important that white collar criminals are treated like criminals, not as a different sector of wrongdoer that don't have to pay for their actions. And what happened here in Malaysia isn't just a Malaysian story, as you were saying. It's a global story. It's a failure of global finance and the regulation of finance.
Tom, give people a sense of scale. So for most of us in Malaysia, we've heard about the 1MDB story, we've read your stories, we've read about how it was covered in places like Sarawak Report and The Edge, and it's so intricately tied into our own politics, right? We think about Najib and Rosmah, but this is the biggest financial scandal in the history of the world. Like, there's been nothing like it.
I mean, we portray it as one of the biggest scandals, but it's definitely the biggest in the sense that, Bernie Madoff took 40 years to lose $18 billion in investor money, and he was worth around $800 million by the end of his fraud. Joe Low allegedly took, $700 million overnight on the first day of the fraud. He had liquid cash of $700 million. And this was not money that existed. It was raised on international markets. And his ability to raise so much money was because interest rates were so low after the financial crisis. And it's a real scandal for the world we live in today, which is super low interest rates, crazy power of banks, the ability to raise money from huge funds, the huge mutual funds that dominate the market, and then he was able just to take that money. It's also a story about sovereign wealth funds. He did it because he ran a sovereign wealth fund from behind the scenes, and he had friends who ran sovereign wealth funds in the Middle East. So the question is, and I think why there's so many people here today, why it's such an amazing moment, is do we want kleptocracies to run the world? Where basically mafia-like organizations run countries and run sovereign wealth funds, Russia, and other places, or I believe the Malaysian people don't want that, and that's what happened in May, right? And people want accountability. They don't want huge pools of government cash being just siphoned off for the few, and that's what this book's about. It's about more than just Malaysia. It's about all this global context.
We spoke before the elections, and you were concerned as to whether or not the book would ever be released in this country. And it wouldn't be, right? I mean, if May 9th had never happened, we would have to smuggle the book in, most likely from Singapore. But what I wanted to ask you, Tom, was, in a sense, if you read the fine print of the anti-fake news law, it was crafted for you in this book. You probably inspired that law.
Well, you told me that, but I'm not so sure about that. I mean, there of course is the Edge, Malaysia
Yes.
Kini, and plenty of other
Thorough
publications
report.
that were. I mean, there were some that weren't pushing the envelope, like the New Straits Times, which was reporting that I had a bee in my bonnet about 1MDB and I should get onto other things.
You were a foreign agent.
I was a foreign agent, but you know there were plenty of journalists here who were annoying the government too, and I think you know the law was aimed at them as well as this book. But yeah, of course, the book would not have been released without changing government, and this reception of the book is really quite astounding. I wasn't expecting anything like this, and it's humbling and it's really interesting because clearly it's not just about the book we've written. The book we've written is somehow interacting with something else that's going on in Malaysia, and there's a moment here, and it's riding that wave. And for me as a foreigner, you know, who's been coming to Malaysia for a few years, it's an incredibly interesting phenomenon to see.
So I'm going to open up the questions in just a bit, but I guess we can't open up the questions without talking about Najib and Rosmah. Hey, because we can in public spaces now. I know, right? Actually, it's all in the book, but I thought, Tom, you could maybe tease people who haven't read the book yet with regards to just how involved the both of them were with the day-to-day with what Jolo was doing, because there was something of a disconnect.
Well, I mean, probably everyone has seen Shafi's comments in the last couple of days that somehow this book absolves, yeah, thank you, I was going to say gets him off the hook, but absolves Najib and Rosmah, well, Najib, of responsibility. It does not. What it says is that Jolo is the only person in this story who has the full picture of what was going on. He's the only one who knew, I mean, Najib knew that 1MDB was a political slush fund. And his defense was always, I didn't take it for personal gain, right? So he took it, in his mind, I think he believes he took it for UMNO. But that doesn't explain the $27 million jewel for Rosmah, the film company for her son, the house in Belgravia, the house in
Central Park.
Penthouse in Central Park, all of these things. But I do think Najib was probably shocked when he found out, when the Department of Justice said, well, 4.5 billion has gone missing, because I think he wasn't paying attention. He wasn't running the fund. He allowed a 27-year-old who just came out of Wharton with no practical experience to run a sovereign wealth fund. And you know, when you do that, money goes missing, right? I mean, I think you know, when it finally became clear how large it was, I'm sure he did not know that himself.
Just talk to me about the style in which you employ in writing this book, because it's very different from your reporting, and rightly so. The book reads, as many of you would have discovered, like a thriller, and I think in many ways that also fools people. I mean, in my review, I said that don't let the effortless prose fool you. I mean, every sentence has been lawyered up and vetted. But talk to me about choosing to write the book in that form and the lawyering process.
So, you know, one of the problems with these huge financial scandals, like the Panama Papers, for example, is that they're very boring to read, because you'll get page after page of money went to this person, money went to that person, and somebody's corrupt and this other person's corrupt, and there's no narrative story there. So and you know, in our earlier Wall Street Journal coverage, there was a lot of money trail because we were being lawyered and we had to make sure that everything was true. But as we were able to find out more of what happened, we decided to write this book based on scenes, right? I mean, it's really a biography of Jolo, and then which is the main narrative structure, which ends with him on the run in China. And then there is a bunch of sub-themes, you know, Goldman's culpability, global finance, how you can buy your way into Hollywood if you have enough money. And we worked out all the scenes that we could, right? So for example, we got hold of Red Granite's emails. And in the contact book of Red Granite were all the cell phone numbers of all the Hollywood stars and all the cell phone numbers of all the Playboy playmates that these guys like to hang around with. So we called 30 Playboy playmates, you know, Miss January, February, March, April.
12 months, how come 13?
Over many years.
Well, over many years, 2008 and 9, and out of the 30 or 40 that we called, you know, 2 of them said, Yeah, I remember Jolo. We went to his birthday party in the Palazzo. And that's Stephanie Larimore that we quote in the book, right? And so that was really the process of building the scenes, getting documents, finding people. Oh, Taiba, the ambassador, right? We were able to build, the UAE's ambassador to the US is a very important figure in Jolo's rise. And we knew that because we got hold of Otaiba's emails, because Otaiba was involved in the blockade of Qatar. And Russia, somebody hacked his emails and we got hold of them. So we were able to build up scenes by this kind of reporting. And once we had the scenes in place on a timeline, then we tried to string them together into a narrative.